All right. Well, look, I've got a guest today, and I usually don't have guests. I've actually never had a guest. So, Adam, you're the first guest. So, uh,
Amazing.
here today with my friend Adam, a colleague of mine from a past life. Adam wanted to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is flow metrics. Maybe first, you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll maybe jump in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been well, first of all, it's great to see you. I mean, we haven't actually talked in quite a while, but have kind of kept in touch over the years through LinkedIn and other things. But it's so great to finally get a chance to chat and catch up.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've been in mainly startups, venture-backed startups, tech startups for 22 or 23 years, I think. I started out as a developer long ago, and mainly been in product management for most of my career. Um, and like companies all sizes. I was at Hootsuite for a little while in Vancouver, and then RBC and their sort of startup arm for a bit. So sort of been exposed to all those different kinds of things, but really do love working with small scale companies that sort of go all the way up to 100, 200 people. I really like that sort of journey and that progress. It's a lot of fun. At the moment, I'm the COO of a startup called Circus, which we are fully remote, but it was originally started in Vancouver, and it's back office film production management software.
Awesome. Well, should we
Yeah,
start talking about this flow metric
yeah,
stuff then?
I love it. Let's do it.
All right. So I'll throw a question at you, kind of go back to the beginning. So first of all, how long have you been using this flow metric stuff with your teams?
In December, around December, November of 2022.
Okay, so a few years.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, how did it start? What were you using before? What caused you to look at them? That sort
Yeah,
of deal.
and so when I started, they were using they'd gotten to a kind of a point where they had been working your sort of a typical Scrum-like process, right? Where they had Jira stood up and they were doing 2-week sprints and kind of the ceremonies that went around them. But sort of had found that they had gotten to a point where the tickets had become quite large in scope, and just were having difficulty being able to get them fitting into a 2-week cycle. So we were sort of like, I let a couple cycles run when I first started, just to see how they went, and just to kind of get a sense for the team and everything else. And then we did make adjustments originally to the Scrum process and managed to get it flowing and moving, and things actually going through in the 2-week cycles and things like that. But once, like at some point, maybe in October or what have you, I kind of realized that, listen, the team was quite senior. And I felt, if I looked ahead 6 or 7 months towards us optimizing for Scrum specifically, it might actually become a hindrance for a team that is quite experienced, or a little bit more seasoned in their roles, and were able to communicate super effectively with one another. And so that's when we kind of talked together and decided that maybe it was time to sort of try something that was a little bit more like flexible, or felt a little bit more freeing from what they had been doing up to that point. And that's when we kind of started to craft our own way of working, leaning on sort of some of those lean-based things, and practices, and started to kind of introduce those to the team over time.
Okay, so I guess it sounds like this was kind of like a collective effort. You kind of working with the team to sort out,
Yep.
this is how we want to work together. These are the things we want to start to measure, which maybe we weren't measuring before. I guess I'm curious about, and I mean, startup companies, so not like a huge hierarchy of managers and all that sort of thing. But any company, there are stakeholders, there are people that care about what you're doing, that care about predictability and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, what did your managers, what did your stakeholders think about, and how did you sort of bring them along for the ride on this sort of shift?
Yeah, I think I was lucky in this scenario for sure, in the sense of like Circus is quite small, and still is, and so there weren't a lot of stakeholders to manage. I think internally, it was really just around not wanting to slow down, or I think that's always the worry when you make a change. That was a big one. Not wanting to cause anything to slow down further or at all. And then the other one was not wanting to lose things. Like, we don't want to lose all these kind of ideas that they had stored up in the backlog over time and things like that. Those are kind of the biggest concerns that I encountered. And just change in general is tough, right? Because it's always hard to move from one thing to the next. So in terms of overall stakeholders, it was really just making sure that folks knew, like, listen, here's how the new process will work. And I really kind of tried to go at that from how they would interact with product already, which was really kind of around feedback and providing customer feedback in that way. So, kind of started by saying, like, this is how we're going to manage feedback. Here's how it works its way into the delivery cycle. Here's how that works. Here's how we kind of work, and just explained it to everybody internally as best I could over time. I'm not the greatest communicator, admittedly, especially when it comes to like process and systems, even though I love to design them. Like, I do sometimes forget to make sure that everyone understands all the aspects of how it works.
Right.
So I think we've found over time better ways to kind of make sure that folks can gain visibility into what's going on, whether that's like the sharing of feedback. I've really been kind of working through that because that's ultimately what's driving the flow. And then I find that folks internally, whether it's customer success or executives, they will look at how effective the product delivery cycle is based on whether or not feedback they're hearing is then getting into the product ultimately, right? That's kind of like a quick gauge. And once they see that working, then it becomes easier to kind of buy in and be like, okay, well, this is great. This is starting to actually bear fruit. So let's keep going.
Nice. So maybe going back to those early days, and maybe from like a measuring and metrics perspective specifically, were there any kind of early insights that you gained? Like, you started working a different way, you started measuring different things, or is there anything immediately that you just like kind of saw like, hey, there's something here?
Totally. Yeah. It totally just the WIP, like work in progress measurement, right out of the gate. As soon as you understand that, and then you couple that with the understanding of the more work that you have in progress, the longer it will take to complete. So I explained that to everyone. Like, I went through a little session internally when we decided to really kind of layer this in and walked through, here's what these things mean. Like, here's why they make sense. So it was really kind of talking about those sort of fundamental aspects of lean, right? And how the work will flow through the system. And I think once folks understand this is just an abstract, like a work item can really be anything. It's not like a ticket or a bug or whatever. It could be really any kind of thing that's flowing through a series of steps or stages. Once everyone can kind of get their head around that, then it becomes a lot easier to understand, oh, well, how efficiently are those things moving through this cycle? And then how do we tweak it to make it go faster or what have you, or make it, more smooth. So, overall, I think it really was seeing the volume of work that we had going on at any one time. And then once you start to break that down and then see where things like how big they are, then you're like, well, if we were able to just kind of like punt this whole thing and just only take this one piece of it, we'd get it done in a fraction of the time. So
Yep.
let's just focus in on that thing, and then it starts to unlock.
Yeah. I think that's pretty common, especially in startup land. Like, high whip is a killer. I've been in
Yeah,
more than one company where they would literally have more projects, like not work items, more projects in progress than they had employees in the company, like total.
total. I believe it.
It's not that uncommon. So I think, yeah, once you start to kind of visualize that, and to your point, you can kind of see where things are starting to pile up and how slow things are actually moving. It makes it a little bit easier to have those conversations about maybe saying no or not yet to certain things.
For sure, for sure. And it gives you like, even just moving a few items through a system and coming back with the first iteration of things like process time, lead time, or what have you, um, or percent complete and accurate. Those three are really been big ones for me. In order to be able to ask questions of like, why one big one that I think I always talk about a lot in Scrum, but I only really started looking for ways to measure it, a few years ago, which was how often on average does a ticket return from QA to development? How many times is that happening, right? And I think, or even code review back to dev. And so when you start to compound a metric like percent complete and accurate, or even looking at it at each stage of your value stream, you're going to see what percentage of the time does work pass through here. If it's 60% of the time, you got a problem, right? Like, why are the first question, it just becomes so much easier to have conversations about the system and the work as opposed to the individual. It's not about why is Matt and QA kicking all these tickets back, or why is Steve and Dev not writing? Like, it's not that question. The question is, how do we reduce the amount of times tickets go from QA back to Eng? How do we drop that? That's the question. And that's a systems question. Why is that happening, right? It's not because of one person or the other. It's because maybe the tickets are too big, or because the staging environment is crap. Who knows, right? There's a million different reasons, but those then become problems that have to be resolved within the system. So it's just ironing those things out become a lot easier when the conversations are just about, well, why do things kick back? Or why are we waiting so long at one stage or the other? What can we do to reduce that wait? That's going to yield performance improvements.
Yep. Yep. I love that that system take on this, right? And I think when you don't have a good visualization or measure of the system, you're kind of only left with like individual blame and individual performance things, right? Which isn't really effective. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I've got one more question for you here, maybe before we wrap up. And maybe this applies to you, maybe it doesn't. But have you been using these types of metrics for any kind of forecasting, like medium term, longer term forecasting? When do we think we're going to be done this chunk of work or whatever? And if so, has doing it this way been more advantageous, more accurate, or the same, or how has that kind of worked out?
So yeah, I definitely do. I think however, the biggest hurdle to overcome is the reflex that internally the question is an engineering question. And so it's engineering, how long will do you think you can get this done by X, or how long is this thing going to take? And then immediately Eng will reflex into estimation mode. And I find I have to remind constantly about that because the question doesn't come up super often because just of our nature, we're not in enterprise tech, so it's a little bit different. But when it does come up, that's sort of how it plays out similarly, right, across the board for everybody probably. I have to kind of go in to be like, well, hold on a second, Eng doesn't have to answer that. I can tell you that it doesn't, right? Like Eng doesn't know, actually. That's the answer. Their guess will be poor. I will tell you the real reason, or the answer, right? Which is based on the Monte Carlo sims and things like that you can run in actionable agile and stuff like that. I don't know how common those are with lean in general. I would imagine that they're probably pretty well used across the board in all kinds of lean deployments. But yeah, running those sims, I do run them quite frequently, especially when we're looking at right now we're kind of going through a move up market, right? And so there's a series of piece of functionality we have to build that are net new. And so we will look at the question. Actually is a weird one. The question isn't how long will it take. I always have to say the question actually is how many work items is it? And then I'll tell you how long it will take. If it's 5-6 work items, we're going to be done by whatever date, right? Like 85% of the time done. And that has worked. We did that. We timed an original batch of functionality for sales into a pipeline. It spat it out. That's what we worked towards. It got delivered, right? And so it was accurate in that way. And so it does work. And it just removes the need for any kind of estimation at an item level or a ticket level or whatever you call it. You just don't need to do it because the system will tell you how long it takes. Like, I think the freeing nature of that, although difficult to communicate to stakeholders internally, I think especially at executive, it's very hard for them to probably just visualize it because it's so new or off or weird. But it does work, and it does work accurately.
Yeah, I think that that percent probability thing, we're 85% sure that it'll be this many things or this date or whatever, is a real game changer for that conversation, because it's kind of like, how much predictability do you need? Like, are you good with that? Or if like that's not the case, if you're good with 50% likelihood, here's the date. You need 100%. I'm not going to give it to you, but 95% looks like this.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about ranges. We're kind of bringing in that sense of collaboration, even with our stakeholders, with our executives, or whatever. It's not just like a one way, here's the date conversation.
Absolutely. And that's so important because it's so important to do that. And again, it goes back to your earlier kind of call, like it's a systems thing. It's not a people thing. It's not because John was wrong, then you got the date wrong, right? Like it's not a punitive scenario. It's like, well, based on this is 2 years of data, we can see the right, we see the outliers. So long as you understand how to like look for the patterns and trends in what is a bad cycle time scatter plot, and those kinds of things. And we did have that early on, right? And it led to analysis, and it led to kind of pulling things apart to figure out, and we fixed it. But when everything's just batched along the bottom of that graph, and you just see a couple things here and there, and that's great. You know that you're on the right track, right? And you know that you're going to be able to deliver an answer that, exactly like you said, that's the weird knee reflex I think we have as software product folks, is really just I'll get that date for you. It's like, well, hold on a second. Well, how accurate do you need it to be? Because I will tell you the date, but it's within the degree of accuracy.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Cool. Well, awesome, man. I think that's good. Maybe just if people want to find you or reach you, what's a good way for them to find you?
Oh God, the LinkedIn probably is the best. Yeah, just search me up on LinkedIn.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Awesome. All right.